Welcome back to It Is Also Written Ministry. We're doing another questions and answers series, and the questions are indeed very timely and commendable. Such vital questions deserve the answers as concrete as are the questions themselves. I personally cannot express how earnestly I hope and pray that every present truth believer that may be listening may gain an experience with God and receive even a greater blessing. First question is from Early Writings, page 36. Ellen G. White says, I saw that the anger of the nations, the wrath of God, and the time to judge the dead were separate and distinct, one following the other. Also that Michael had not stood up, and that the time of trouble, such as never was, had not yet commenced. So in the above quotation, there are four subjects brought to view, namely, number one, the judgment of the dead, number two, the anger of the nations, number three, the wrath of God, and that the time of trouble such as never was had not yet commenced. Well, we see that the first three events, according to the vision, occupy three separate and distinct periods of time, one following the other. However, the time of trouble, in harmony with the vision, could take place during any of the three periods of time above mentioned. The wrath of God in the seven last plagues, Revelation 15:1, which, as understood, occupies the period between the close of probation and the second coming of Christ. And as far as the judgment of the dead, covers the period from 1844 to the commencement of the judgment of the living, and as the wrath of God falls in the period from the close of probation to the second coming of Christ, it is evident that the anger of the nations must occupy the time of the judgment of the living during the loud cry of the third angel's message. And looking at the judgment of the dead and the seven last plagues being fairly understood by nearly all Seventh-day Adventists, we shall not say more about these, but shall confine our study only to the time of the anger of the nations. First of all, Armageddon cannot be the anger of the nations above mentioned, for it is fought in the time of the sixth plague, Revelation 16, verses 12 through 16, and that is in the period of the wrath of God, during which, according to the vision above mentioned, the anger of the nations could not occur. For their anger and the wrath of God are two separate and distinct events, one following the other. Consequently, the Armageddon is one thing, and the anger of the nations is another. As the 144,000 are to go through the time of the anger of the nations, the time of trouble such as never was, as well as through the time of the wrath of God, and yet be preserved for translation. And as the anger of the nations must take place in the time of the judgment of the living, it follows that Michael is to stand up in the time of the judgment of the living and deliver his people from the anger of the nations, the time of trouble, or else it would be impossible to preserve the lives of all the 144,000, proving the fact that a change is to take place at the commencement of the judgment of the living. Michael is to stand up for his people, take the reins in his own hands. Testimonies to Ministers, page 300, it goes on to say, and deliver every one that shall be found written in the book. May God's people be aroused by the Good Shepherd's voice now and place their names in the book by sighing and crying for all the abominations that are being done in the midst thereof, so that when the trouble bursts out, when the overflowing scourge shall pass through, they may find shelter. So the anger of the nations being in the time of the judgment of the living after the sealing of the 144,000 in the loud cry of the third angel's message, their anger is against who? It's against God's people, not against each other nation. Otherwise, the statement in Early Writings, page 36, could not be correct. For the nation against each other have been and are angry. For instance, the world's war took place in the time of the judgment of the dead, World War I, World War II, etc. So what does the anger of the nations look like? How is it developed? Well, it's developed by the decree of the two-horned beast is to enact and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, Revelation 13:15. For the fact that all the nations will follow in the footsteps of the two-horned beast, and the same crisis will come upon our people in all parts of the world, showing that this That is, the anger of the nations is a worldwide confederacy against who? Against God's people, as predicted by the prophet Zechariah. Zechariah says, "And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3. Verse 8 proves that at the time of the anger of the nations, clad in the armor of Christ's righteousness, the church is to enter upon her final conflict. The Bible says, "Fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners, she is to go forth into all the world, conquering and to conquer. And in that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them at that day shall be as David, and the house of David shall be as God, and the angel of the Lord before them." So those who have been timid and self-distrustful will declare themselves openly for Christ and his truth, and the most weak and the hesitating in the church will be as David, willing to do and to dare. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 81. "Let the weak say, I am strong. Oh, what a day that is coming." So the anger of the nations cannot transpire or take place until after the sealing of the 144,000. And so this is what is meant by the phrase or the verse that says that God is holding back the winds of strife until the 144,000 are sealed. Our goal is to know what the final message is and to strive to be in that number. And of course, this is the focus and the goal of It Is Also Written ministry, that is to bring in and develop a great army, the 144,000, who will then give the final message, bringing in the final harvest, the final ingathering of the great multitude. Our second question is dealing with few or many saved. The plan of salvation had been accomplished, says Early Writings, page 281, but few had chosen to accept it. This statement is used very extensively against the doctrine of the great multitude, those that are living in the last days, that will be translated as taught by the Spirit of prophecy in the Bible. Though during his own ministry on earth, Jesus lamented that many be called, but few are chosen. Yet long before, through Isaiah, he had declared in prophetic promise to the church, "Thy gates shall be open continually, and they shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, and that their kings may be brought. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in his time. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his path. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord." And through the prophet Zechariah, he again records this promise. Many nations shall be joined to the Lord in that day. And it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die. But the third, that is the third, shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. And they shall call on my name, and I will hear them, and I will say, It is my people. And they shall say, The Lord is my God. What's interesting is, you recall, 1/3 of the angels in heaven prior to the creation of mankind, they rebelled against God's laws and therefore were cast out of heaven. That was 1/3. And so 2/3 were saved and 1/3 were cast out of heaven. Now, are we seeing in this verse that God is going to save 1/3, replacing the fallen angels with those that are going to be saved and regenerated by the Holy Spirit? And 2/3, the 2/3 movement will be those that will rebel on the earth. It just goes from 1/3 rebelled to 1/3 saved. In the beginning, 2/3 saved, and in the end of time there will be a 2/3 movement that will rebel against God here on earth. So you have the rebellion in heaven and you have the rebellion on earth. Moreover, while in early writings, Ellen White on page 281, the author says, "But few have chosen to accept it." In the Great Controversy, page 665, she classifies the great multitude of Revelation 7:9, notice, as a company separated or separate from the martyrs and from all others who are to be resurrected, thereby plainly showing that the great multitude are not resurrected, but the living translated. This is also borne out in the Counsels to Teachers, page 532. So we've noticed that here at It Is Also Written Ministry that there's two living groups in the last days. The first one, called the first fruits, are the 144,000 who will be translated. The second fruit, which is in reference to the first fruits, the ingathering or the harvest that the 144,000 bring in the last days during the time of the harvest, is called the great multitude. And with the hope of being translated, they will never see death. Now, if we are to arrive at the truth, we must interpret the statement in early writings and the one in Matthew 20:16 in a way as to harmonize with Isaiah 60:11 and also verse 22, Zechariah 2 verse 11, and chapter 13 verses 8 and 9. The Great Controversy, page 665, and other passages, all of which show that there is to be a great multitude. No candid Bible student who's honest would build a theory upon an interpretation that would lead him to set aside all of the scriptures on the subject. He will seek to make his final analysis in such a way as to be in perfect harmony with all of them, or else confess that he does not have the light on the subject. In the clear light of the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, passages here cited, the weight of evidence incontestably leads to the conclusion that a great multitude is to be saved. The truth becomes evident then that the word few comprehends those saved at the call of each message during the ages past, the time of the harvest. But now in the closing of the world's history, during the harvest time of the gospel, there is to be a great ingathering of redeemed souls called a great multitude, such as no man can number. The term harvest implies just such a reaping. Thus, in comparison to the aggregated number of the lost through the ages, the aggregated number of the saved are few. But non-comparatively, the aggregated saved of all ages are, in actual count, many. To this fact attest the words of Ezekiel. "And so I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceeding great army." And so, as the salvation of a great multitude is counter only to the devil's plan, let us not work to his interest.